Welcome to A Nice Place to Podcast, a City of Fountain Valley podcast. Join us each month as we discuss all topics, fun, informational, and educational, that's related to Fountain Valley. We appreciate your support and thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome back to A Nice Place to Podcast, episode number 9. I'm your mayor and host, Glenn Grandis, and I'm happy to introduce our guest, Dan Gibb, a local historian. So, Dan, first off, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Glenn. This is exciting, and I know how important history is, and so this is a great thing you're doing here.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. So hopefully we're going to learn a little bit about the history of Fountain Valley, and also Dan has written a book on Fountain Valley, and this is really cool. Little side story. For my last birthday, my new sister-in-law from Ohio, as my birthday gift, sent this to me. I don't know how she got it, but it was pretty cool to get that.
Interesting. Well, how does she know? I wonder.
I don't know. She searched for it and found it, and she knows, being the mayor of Fountain Valley, that I would appreciate that, and I really did. It's a great book. So
someone must have told her. It's a regional history book, so it's sold in the immediate area, but they do cover coast to coast, Arcadia Publishing. So. Interesting. All the way to Ohio.
Well, there you go.
Okay.
So, all right. So let's start out.
Okay.
So how far back in history do you know about Fountain Valley?
Well, there's been different days thrown out there, but if you look even into, I think it's the Anaheim Gazette newspaper, which is a big paper for the time in the new county of Orange, there are references to Fountain Valley as far back as 1875.
Oh, wow.
So Fountain Valley was a thing in 1875.
Really? Was it called Fountain Valley?
It was called. Oh, yes. Yes, they were actually talking about school district development and all sorts of things. So it goes back that far.
Yeah, so I read in the book, mm-hmm. I went through it, and I read, and I saw that the school district was around in the late 1800s, and then it stopped for a while, or?
People leave, and then they come back, and the population varied so much that there was I believe at least once or twice where it dissolved or just went dormant,
right,
and then picked back up again. So being just a farm area, the populations could swing wildly, and that was the case with the school district.
Yeah, I was reading about like the large piece of land that was here. I guess was it the Wardlow, or did they come second or after?
Courageous, Wardlow, and Callens and some of those pioneer families. It was all late 1800s, basically, coming from Long Beach, right. The Wardlows and the Talberts, and so those were just our earlier main pioneer families. But a lot of the land was just it was unused, and it was just a swampland for the most part. Not all of it, but it wasn't the greatest land. So that's why we were sort of the last to develop as far as all the other cities around us, because it was just swampy farmland until they contained the water.
Yeah, it was interesting when I was reading, and it was cattle land, right? That was
a lot of it at the time because of the water.
Right.
So, there's stories about the Irvine family losing cattle to drought and driving their cattle from Irvine to Fountain Valley. So, whereas Huntington Beach had their oil, Fountain Valley had their water.
Fountain Valley had the water. Interesting.
Water. Yeah, and so for cattle and farming, a lot of the farming, you didn't have to have irrigation always at the very beginning because the water table was so high. So that made things easier for the local farmers to grow.
Got it. Okay. So I read somewhere in there that there was a big drought that occurred, and when the drought hit, then the cattle obviously couldn't stay anymore, and it turned into really productive farmland at that point.
Yes, they when the settlers started coming in, they realized that they had to contain and control the water. Mm-hmm. And once that was done, the Talbert Drainage District, I think it's 1904 or whatever, they started dredging canals. Everybody knows the ditches all around Fountain Valley. They drained those canals to control the water because the historic Santa Ana River pretty much went whatever it wanted to. And in heavy rains, it was just unpredictable and uncontrollable on the small scale with the families. So they had to form that drainage district, dredge canals, and then once the water was contained, farming took off because the land. You figure for eons, the rich, fertile lands that would wash down from the Santa Ana Mountains end up right here. So we have all that nature's fertilizer.
That makes sense.
Right. So farming was just perfect for the region, especially once the water was contained. So that's how the boom took place.
Interesting. Do you know what kind of farming they did back then? Or?
Well, initially it was called the crops were grown. We became a truck farming community, but the first farming would be large crops like sugar beets, things like that, field crop farming.
Right.
And then as a lot of the landowners started selling off parcels of land, a lot of other families got into farming, and then became more of a truck crops, which would be the vegetables and things like that.
Interesting.
But it was just perfect for a lot of different crops, and the different communities brought in different crops that they specialized in.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah, I was reading a little bit in the book. It was the sugar beets, right?
Sugar beets was the big one.
Yeah, and they were taking that by horse-drawn carriages, I guess, to other cities after they harvested.
Yeah, they're called beet dumps because we had two main sugar refinery factories here. We had one over by the 55 and Dyer Road. Everybody knows the big atrium hotel there. I'm not sure the name of it. Okay. That was one sugar factory, and the other one was Huntington Beach. It was the Holly Sugar Factory. So that was where they would have different local areas that they would bring the horse-drawn carts with all the sugar beets, and then they would either take them to the train depots in Huntington Beach or around other areas, and then they would train it over to the big refineries, and they set the price. I mean, we were one of the largest sugar producers in the country by far.
Wow!
Here,
I never knew that.
Yeah,
That's
just
interesting.
This local area. We set the price on the market for chili peppers, and celery and different crops like that. We were prolific suppliers of different crops here.
And you mentioned that this is kind of like swampy land and stuff. So
right.
did we have a nickname back in the day?
Yes, I'm glad you asked because the term or the name Gospel Swamp. Everybody says Gospel Swamp. To a lot of historians, technically, Gospel Swamp was actually on the east side of the Santa Ana River. Technically, Greenville was a township on the other side of actually, our first mayor, Jim Cano, was born in Greenville. Greenville town was probably ground zero for the term Gospel Swamp, and it just meant because before everything was organized and the water was channeled and taken control of, it was swampy in this area, and so there was a lot of squatters. And with unregulated land comes, amongst other things, there was a lot of itinerary preaching going on, revival tents and things like that.
Right.
And so it just kind of took on a nickname, Gospel Swamp. There's terms or there's stories about the kids made up the name Gospel Swamp because the preachers would come through and all the revivals going on. But like I say, for the purists out there, the historians, Gospel Swamp was basically started in Greenville because Fountain Valley was sort of the last one to be developed in this general area right here. It just kind of stuck with the name, Gospel Swamp.
So it was never officially called that.
It's just a nickname, just a moniker. Just like you hear it from Huntington Beach. Huntington Beach has the bogs and the tules and the sticks and stuff, but the swampy swamp area, it's in between the two bluffs, the bluffs of, here we have where the Courageous Ranch is.
Right.
Everything underneath that was a swampy area, so Gospel Swamp.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, so that's time period we're talking about cattle farmers or the late 1800s, early 1900s. They turned into farms and such. So let's move forward just a little bit. What was like the 20s, 30s, 40s? What was that like here in Fountain Valley?
In Fountain Valley. So...
Well, it wasn't Fountain Valley yet, right?
Well, it was... Technically.
It wasn't an incorporated city yet.
No, it wasn't a city. It was just an area. So you lived in the area of Fountain Valley. You lived in the town of Fountain Valley.
What did it look like?
Farms.
Lots of farms.
All farms, yeah. And then different things happen, and that creates movement with different peoples. But for the early part, it was really sparse. I mean, the houses were farmhouses, and they were set wide apart. And so it was just, in the paper, it would be called a village or a township.
Right.
So the village of Talbert was basically Bichard and the street of Talbert. That was the village. So they had big plans for laying it out for being a big a bigger town, but it didn't quite take that way. But so the area was just mostly farmers spread throughout the area.
And who do you know who were the main farmers there? Who were the town leaders at that time?
Back then, the Courageous family came in on the Bluffs. They were Basque sheep herders, so of course the Bluffs were perfect for the sheep industry, sheep raising. The Wardlows and the Cowans, and then the Talberts, Huntington Beach, Fountain Valley, the whole area. I mean, you got to remember back then there weren't signs that said "Welcome to Huntington Beach" or "Welcome to Fountain Valley." You were just in the area, basically.
Right.
So these founding families that came in, like the Talberts, it was actually the two Talbert brothers that came in that also was doing, besides the drainage district, they were starting businesses in that. In the ground center was Talbert and Bichard. So there, we started with a blacksmith shop,
right,
and then a church, and then a general store, and then a meat butcher, and then all that kind of stuff. So that was ground zero, and it's amazing. A lot of those families are still around. Is the amazing part.
Right. Oh, that's true.
They're still around, but and then everything just grew out from there as real estate prices went up. It changed the landscape a lot, but the main pioneer families are actually still around, which is good. You don't see that everywhere. So.
And tell us about Fountain Valley when we first were incorporated. Well, how did we become a city? And why did we become a city?
Well, basically, the short answer is to protect either your way of life or your business, being a farm or whatever it was. The boom time in the area for incorporation, we got caught up in it was the mid 50s,
right?
And so all the local areas were as quickly as they can incorporating.
Other cities wanted to take us over.
Everybody wanted to take us over, and our population was so low that we were seemingly ripe for the picking. From Santa Ana, Westminster, Huntington Beach, all these towns, they just wanted to gobble up Fountain Valley.
Interesting.
So the incorporation in 57 and a lot of other closer cities around us incorporating 55, 56, all in that area. That was pretty much a self-preservation act. So, and actually, we should touch on that because the confusion of Talbert and Fountain Valley. So, like I said, Fountain Valley, the term Fountain Valley goes back to the late 1800s. The being named Talbert, which a lot of people are not familiar with the way it laid out, is when the Talberts purchased a general store, they decided to get a post office. You have to apply to the federal government for post office. So they needed to apply to the McKinley administration to ask to have a post office. So they got on their horse and buggy and rode up to Sacramento and asked, and apparently it still hasn't been settled officially, but they were denied the name Fountain Valley.
Really?
And since the Talberts went up there, might as well call it Talbert. Shocking.
Yeah.
So we had to become the town of Talbert because our post office was the Talbert Post Office.
Interesting.
So our general store right there in Talbert and Bichard became the post office, and Tom Talbert became the postmaster. So you lived in the Fountain Valley area in the town of Talbert, and you went to the Fountain Valley School in the town of Talbert. So you can see the confusion.
Yeah.
So when incorporation came around 57, they said, well, we should go back to our original name, which is Fountain Valley. So that's why I went from Fountain Valley to Talbert, and in 57 back to Fountain Valley.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, so how did they come up with the name Fountain Valley?
Basically, it was all about the water. Like I say, the water table was so high here because being a historic riverbed,
right?
There's all sorts of stories about driving a fence post for your horse. Up comes the geyser water, kind of like the Beverly Hillbillies shooting at a rabbit. Up comes the oil, gold.
Right.
Our gold, for
water.
the Beverly Hillbillies was oil, and Huntington Beach was oil.
Right.
Here was water.
All right.
And everybody was grabbing. So of course, they tried to drill for oil here. Warner and Bichard, they're drilling for oil. They hit water. So anyway, water was our gold.
And that's how we became Fountain Valley.
Artesian wells. There's stories from old residents that would say, at one, when you'd run a pipe and hit this artesian well, they would start gushing, and before they would cap it or whatever, it looked like a water fountain.
Right.
And I think it was even the Japanese community that said they would run or pull reeds over the top of the pipes, to try to get sprays to spray the water to help dissipate all the alkali.
Right.
Because there's so much alkali that built up here. We had the big earthquake in this area in 1933, and it just shook everything up to the point where everything was liquefaction and sand coming up and alkali. And so they had to, of course, turn over. The big earthquake in 1933 just seemingly destroyed the farming industry in a lot of parts because of what happened to the soil. And so they had to remedy that through building.
There's a great photo in the book that shows one of these wells and the water spraying up, and so I could see how they get in Fountain Valley.
Yeah.
All right, let's get back. Okay, so we're in 57. So pretty historic for our city and for the country with our first mayor. Can you touch on that one?
The farmers had to come together to fend off all the grabbers of the other local cities that wanted to gobble us up, and so they all got together and the farmers, from what I've read, the farmers basically chose Jim Kano, Japanese American, to become our first mayor.
And from what I understand, first Japanese American mayor in the entire country.
Yes and no.
There's always rumors.
Right.
Huh?
That's why we like history so much. Everything should come with a disclaimer.
Okay.
As far as we know it. As far as we know, because there's always something. It's like when the book came out. It wasn't a month after the book came out I wrote, and hey, you said this, and you said it's really this.
As far as we know.
Yeah. You said it was east. It's west. I mean,
that's like me. I claim to be the first Fountain Valley High School Barron mayor.
Are you?
Because I think I am.
See?
Nobody's proved otherwise yet. So there you go.
You want to have a disclaimer tattoo right here. Everything I say, everything should be disclaimed. So yes, so first mainland mayor of Japanese descent, and what happened was there was a lot of unrest because of the incarceration and internment of the Japanese community during World War II.
Right.
And since Fountain Valley's makeup was, I mean, the numbers are, without getting into the numbers, generally you could say, well, this area of Fountain Valley was a third Hispanic, third Japanese, third Caucasian, basically.
So let's talk about that real quick.
Oh, okay.
So a third Japanese. Most of them were the farmers, the landowners, and ran the farms. Right.
And that and when I say a third, someone's like, it wasn't a third. We were more.
Yeah.
We were not. Okay.
Round numbers.
Right. But when you say landowner, the federal government had laws for aliens purchasing land. So the Issei community of the Japanese community, or the first generation Japanese who were actually born in Japan, and around the area, different members of that community would buy land, but then when the alien land laws came in, they couldn't buy land, and those land laws went all the way through the 50s or whatever. So, so they purchased land, and then they had to find ways after the land laws to get land, and sometimes it was you couldn't have a lease, so it could be a handshake, it could be a gentleman's agreement. Can I lease this land and farm it?
Interesting.
So they had a rough time, of course, you can imagine. But
but became mayor of the city. So clearly there was a way to make things happen.
Because all the farmers have to work, so and everything and all the things that would come along with that. And then as far as the federal government was concerned, they had Jim on like a Radio America and everything because they were trying to squell, all the aftermath of the war and the craziness and everything that was going on. And so so Jim was the first one. And the reason I brought up earlier is because apparently, this got back to the East Coast. And someone on the East Coast, I don't know if it's New Hampshire, Connecticut or something, well, no, actually so-and-so, and there's a little island off the East Coast of America, and he was the first mayor and he's Japanese.
That's all right. We own it. We're taking it.
We'll stick with it.
There you go.
We're going to stick with it. So Jim.
All right, so let's talk about the second part, the second third. You talk about Hispanic heritage.
Right.
It's Chicano Heritage Month. This month. It is, So this is very timely.
Okay.
Let's talk about the community off of Ward. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that community was known as Colonial Juarez.
Right.
And of people from Mexico coming up was because of the Mexican Revolution. So that's basically 1910 to 1920. So, of course, a lot of people, pack your bags, were out of here because of the fighting and stuff.
Oh, okay.
So the influx coming up north of the border. And then, of course, America says, "Oh, what's happening?" Because we had a Bracero worker program that went all the way into the '60s. So when we needed farm labor and things like that. There's a shortage of farm labor because of World War I, because of World War II, bring in Bracero workers. So we had a great program called the Bracero Worker Program, and there's still remnants of that program here in Fountain Valley. There's a couple historic spots there.
Yeah, I've been through the neighborhood. I mean, it still exists today. A lot of the same families are there still that have been there for
since 1920s. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say decades, but over a century.
Yes, since 1920s. So what it was a couple landowners had owned that land, the Turners. It was Ashby and Josephine Turner had that. They owned that. It's 40 acres. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to turn it into a Mexican town, basically. So what they did is they had a big sale, and there's entertainment, all sorts of things, and they were marketing it to the farm workers, the field labor workers, and so there was even restrictions. You had to be a Spanish-speaking field worker to even buy the property in there.
Interesting.
So it was 40 acres. It was about 100 and I can't remember.
So 56, I think I saw on a
something
chart.
Like that. How many? Yeah, how many lots? And so what they did is they split them off into different lots, and what they were 50 feet by 300 feet deep.
Oh, very deep.
Right. And so basically what it was is you could have your own little farm at home. So dad's out working the field. Mom and the kids are at home, and you're growing crops, and you're growing chickens and rabbits and pigs and all. So you have.
I wondered why it was such a narrow, long lot. That makes sense.
Your own little farmland, right? And so that.
How about that?
Yeah. So that community grew, and that was in like 1922. I think they bought it in 1923. They divided and started selling the lots in 23. And there's still families there since the 1920s.
I know several of the families. They're great people and very proud people, and very proud of the history.
Long, rich history there.
Yeah, and the value that they brought to our community and to our farms. And Fountain Valley would not be what it is today without this community that's there.
Yeah, because remember, it was just a community in the area of Fountain Valley.
Right.
So that Fountain Valley, you mean the little village over on, well, it wasn't even a street, but over on Bouchard and Talbert? Well, that village was a mile or two away from the community.
All right, so let's talk about where it is so people know. So we're talking about Ward between Slater and Warner.
Right.
Across from what school's over there? I forget which school that is. Across the street. Anyway.
Well, yeah, it's across the street from Mile Square, where the driving range is. The entrance there, Ward goes into the Mile Square Park, and so that community was there long before anybody else in the 20s, and then, like a lot of places, as everything encroaches upon them, you have all the issues of encroachment. But across the street was one of the largest grain mills and cattle ranches that was growing cattle and I think selling feed to the Alpha Beta. People are familiar with Alpha Beta markets.
Right.
That was out of Huntington Beach. So that family, that's the McIntosh family, they were across the street. So you had cattle across the street, nothing else, and then Colonial Juarez. And basically the colony, it's I think the correct description, it's an unregulated community that's just there doing their thing. And there was I think 5 or more in Orange County. There's some that are still there. There's one, I think it's La Paz in Anaheim. There's Los Bosa in Huntington Beach. So I think there's about 5 or more colonies or colonias in Orange County, and that was ours there. So, and remember, they were there before Mile Square was Mile Square. That was just other farmland, and before the government in World War II bought all that land up to turn into the Mile Square. They were kind of out there all by themselves.
Which was a military base before it's the park.
Yeah, it was actually an emergency landing field for crash landings.
Right.
Basically,
right.
For Los Alamos.
Well, we both went to Fountain Valley High School. Been there a long time. I remember the Gordon Bennett balloon race there, and the airfields in the middle, all gone now.
Yeah, when I first moved here, our windows would rattle all day long because the Marine helicopters would do touch and go. So it was never any structures there at Mile Square. It was just for practicing. It was actually in the middle of Mile Square, they had painted aircraft carrier outlines. And so the reason it was a triangle is the Corsair fighter pilots would practice landing with the wind, against the wind, and crosswind.
Oh, interesting.
And then from there, it went to Korea and Vietnam War, and then switched from the Navy to the Marine Corps. And so that's how the whole Mile Square thing got started. But the property was, I think, 22 different farmers, and that's why it's called Mile Square. The other fields in Orange County were a lot of times bought off of one farmer, so they have a name of those fields. Ours is called Mile Square.
I know. My friends who come in from out of town and stuff, they always laugh about the name Mile Square. They're like, why isn't it called Square Mile? Because it's a square mile.
Military name.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And there's
now I can have an answer for that.
I won't say it now, but someone can ask me, because I think one of the funniest stories about Miles Square and Colonial Juarez is tied together. Ask me about Miles Square and Colonial Juarez connection on a funny side note, and I'll tell you something.
We'll talk about that. It sounds like we can't talk about it today.
No, it's funny. But,
okay. All right, so let's talk about the Historical Society. So I know you're a member there. Tell us a little bit about that.
So the Historical Society, we used to actually for a while there, when I first got in I forgot what years, 2000, no, before that. Anyway, we used to meet at the Recreation Center. Right. And the fire department had built a structure to store the original fire truck we had that we bought from Signal Hill. And that property is right next to our library. That was a horse ranch at one time. Right. And then we got them to build onto it, to add onto it, and so we can have our meetings there. And so now we have we moved the fire truck back to the fire department, and so now we have that structure. That little park is for our Historical Society for different events throughout the year, and that's where we store all our historical facts.
And if you've never been in there, it's amazing what they have inside. So how does the general public get to see this stuff?
Well, the first Saturday of every month we have like a work party there, and anybody that is interested can come by anytime on the first Saturday of the month to look around, or you can just wait and keep abreast of city events, because there's a lot of functions that happen there. Christmas in the gazebo, summer ice cream socials. So there's events throughout the year that anybody can come and just and check it out if they want.
And I hear residents could rent it?
Yes, it is for rent.
The way I know that, that's where I got married. So yes, it's a beautiful place to get married with the gazebo as you're facing the library. It's off to the right behind the white picket fence that's there.
Right next to our
famous
library.
How does somebody become a member of the Historical Society?
You can contact us. We have a web page, I think a Facebook page. I don't have the address off the top of my mind for our P.O. box. But if you ask anybody in the city, they can guide you to one of us on the board, and then we'll get you a membership form. And we do need it because history has to be saved. And,
it does.
And like all organizations, you're always looking for new members. And history is always evolving. Everything in the past is history. And so right now, on a personal note, I'm looking for someone from the Vietnamese community, because their history, they got a great history too. Right. And the history of them from the 70s when it first started developing here, we need that person to step up and help us with their history to be placed in the Historical Society. So,
that's good to know. Yeah. All right, so you heard it, people. If you're of Vietnamese descent or have Vietnamese history,
if you're that historian,
All right, so Dan, thank you so much. I really learned a lot today. That was very informative. They went super fast too at the time. So
there's so much to know, and literally we just scratched the surface. I mean, there's a volume of books that could be written just about the colony. And so I'm trying to get any of those original family members, if they can always contact me, and because I'm always looking for photos. I specialize in photo history, but any information, we got to save the stories, right? Because time marches on, people move, people pass away, and the younger generation. So if anybody out there wants to join in and help us collect all the information we can, because there's still lots more to know and to make note of for the history of the colony. Yeah.
All right. So if you're interested in a subject matter to be featured on a future podcast, let us know. You can email us here at fvproud@fountainvalley.gov. So Dan, thank you again. Really appreciate you being here.
You're welcome.
And we hope you tune in next month to our monthly podcast series, A Nice Place to Podcast. I'm your mayor and host, Glenn Grandis. We'll see you next time. Thank you for tuning in to this month's podcast. Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.